Welcome, everybody, to the TBD Pod. Today we have Nick Haines. He is the CEO of Bromley Companies. Bromley is probably most known in Tampa with the Midtown Tampa development. It's a fantastic development right on the corner of 275 and Dale Mabry. We're going to dig into the story today, but what's the journey there? 25 or 30 years kind of making that property come to life?
Yep. 25 since 1996, we acquired the first piece of property that ultimately became Midtown.
Amazing. And you drive there today and you see so many people enjoying all the shops and restaurants. It's almost like a little city within a city.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, that's what it's supposed to be.
And all the great tenants too. Whole Foods, super exciting to have an REI there. I can't afford anything in there, but I'm working my way up to it.
Yeah.
And you were starting off with a story because this is a family business, right? Bill Haines, your father, started this company 50-something years ago?
52 years ago.
52 years ago. And you were getting ready to tell me a story about how your father came to Tampa.
Yeah. So back in the early 90s, 1991, 92, where the real estate market was really, I think, depressed nationally, he got a call from a business broker who said, I have a great investment for you. It's got a real estate dimension to it. And it was a recycled pallet company that was based in the fairgrounds by I-75. And what this company did is they took wooden pallets that were, they dropped off at Walmart and stuff, and they'd recycle them. So they'd fix them up after they got dropped off at Walmart. These guys would pick them up, they'd bring them to this pallet yard, and they would resell them. And that's how he got to Tampa. So I don't think he knew what a pallet was when he got this call, but it was kind of an interesting business, it was a family business, and they were looking to kind of sell out. And I think he told the guy, look, I'll make you an offer to invest in this company as long as you stay as part of the business. He didn't want to run it. And that's how he got to Tampa. So it was a company that became Bromley. It was Suncoast Pallet when he invested it. It ultimately became Bromley Pallet. And that's how he got involved with Tampa.
And so your father was a entrepreneur, businessman.
Yes.
Was he deep into real estate investment at that time?
Yeah, no, real estate was his core business. And he started his career in the kind of late 60s, early 70s, actually in student housing. So he started in student housing before it became as trendy as an asset class as it is today.
That was super early on for student housing, right?
Yes. Yeah, he was in graduate school. The quick story there is he was in graduate school at the University of Ohio. He ultimately took a job there as director of housing. And so in the late 60s, when there was a lot of tumult in campuses, he was director of housing at the University of Ohio. And then a private developer, actually a big company, Tishman, a big national real estate developer, they'd built some dorms in the Midwest, including one at the University of Ohio. And they said, we built these things, but we have no idea how to run these things. And so ultimately they hired him to help run the buildings that they developed. And there's one at Ohio, there's one at University of Illinois, which we actually still own today. That was the first asset. That was the first acquisition we bought 50 years ago. So we're long-term owners.
I would say so.
And anyway, so that's how he kind of started his career. He got involved with offices in New York City and different things. And then, he really an entrepreneurial company, and he kind of got involved with this pallet recycling business. As I mentioned, there wasn't as much going on in real estate, but there was a real estate dimension to it, right? Because there are all these industrial yards where these pallet recycling companies were. And as he grew the business, he acquired some of that real estate as part of it.
And the first parcel of Midtown was purchased about 30 years ago, right?
Yeah, 1996. So he'd come down to Tampa for this pallet recycling, and he'd always kind of look at real estate. So he was always interested in like what real estate was available. And so there was a building, I think it was best known for its kind of time and temp sign on top of it. I think it was the Progressive building. They had their claims agents there for many years. Not a great looking building. And there was an insurance foreclosure sale that happened. And so he put a bid in for this building, didn't think he'd get it. And then he got a call, I think it was over Christmas, and said, Bill, you got the building for, I think it was $3.5 million, and you got to close in a week. And, at that point he had some banking relationships down here from doing business with the pallet yard and kind of work with the Bank of Tampa and AmSouth at the time. But it's interesting because at that building, I think none of the local banks really thought it was kind of a viable investment, even at a relatively low price back then. So he found a bank from New York that was going to lend him the money to buy it. and he closed on that building. And the intent when he first bought that building was to really run it as a 50,000 foot office building. There were no grand plans of a development or anything like that. It was just kind of a standalone asset. Yep, you got it up there on the screen. So you see it on the left there, that little tiny building there with the men's warehouse was in front of it. And yeah, so we bought that building. And then he tried to lease the building, right? There was some vacancy in that building. And back at the time, it doesn't obviously look like this image, but all those kind of, the empty land all around it had probably 20 different little industrial buildings, little retail buildings. And they weren't like the best looking building. I think there was a bowling alley there on the corner of kind of Cypress and Himes. And so the tenants, he found this great tenant that he was really excited about taking half the building. And the tenant was moving down the process. And then at the end, the tenant said, I just can't put my company in this building because I don't want to look at these god-awful little industrial buildings. It just doesn't feel good. So he started buying some of the land around that building, really not, again, not really for an investment, but to try to lease the office building. And at the time, the buildings were very inexpensive to buy because the land wasn't that expensive there and, kind of tenants. So he bought some of those buildings to try to lease it up. And there's a parking lot to the south there, gas station on the corner. Anyways, but then the kind of the real estate development juices started to flow. And the thing about the site that initially attracted him was ultimately one of the important parts of the site. Dale Mabry and 275 is the highest trafficked intersection in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
And his philosophy always was like, when you can just summarize a site in a really easy way, like the highest trafficked intersection in Tampa Bay, you'll be able to make something about it. Right. So he ended up getting the building leased. But then I think the juices were like, there's a development opportunity here. And so over the next 3 or 4 years, he assembled the first phase of our assemblage, which was 13 acres, for a development we put together in 2001, and it was called Tampa Bay 1. And Tampa Bay 1 was a office hotel site that was assembled. There was 2 office buildings and a Westin hotel we'd organized on the site. And that when we got it rezoned, we worked for a bunch of years to get it rezoned. And I think, it's an interesting story with your grandfather, Mayor Greco, as he was getting organized to do this development, because he was obviously meeting a lot of the local politicians and land use people and stuff like that. But so that's really how things kicked off as Tampa Bay 1.
And so this is this would be late 90s, early 2000s,
yes.
as he's acquiring more
Yes.
and more. And where are you at the time? Were you within the company?
No, I wasn't. So I, at the time, was working on Wall Street, actually.
Oh, wow.
I worked at Merrill Lynch. I was working for an international investment group. So absolutely nothing to do with real estate, nothing to do with the business, doing something kind of completely independent. So
did you keep up with this at all? Because
not really.
you're like, yeah, Dad, cool,
Yeah.
great site.
My father was very... joining the family business, the real estate business, was really not even a conversation we had growing up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think he wanted to give me the space to find my own way and figure out my own interests. So I worked, in the mid to late 90s, I worked kind of on Wall Street in New York. I worked for this international investment group at Merrill Lynch, and I did this M&A job at this firm called Brown Brothers. I went to business school in 98 to 2000. And then after business school, I actually worked at a tech company doing kind of wireless software. So I was very, certainly conversation with your father about what's going on, but I was not working in real estate.
Yeah.
I candidly wasn't that interested in real estate. I was just kind of doing your own thing in your mid to late 20s. But then, in 2004 or 5, he had a kind of a younger guy that was working with him who moved to Texas with his family. And I was kind of leaving the software company, and I kind of wanted to get out of my house. So I said, look, can I just go down to the office and just use the office space to look for a job? And, and then 19 years later, here I am. But ultimately, that's kind of how I started getting involved. I'm like, oh, this is really kind of interesting. And I was really good with pro formas and the finance side of things. Right. And so, so that's when I joined in 2005.
So you guys end up with this incredible site. How many acres did you control when you first amassed this
So
whole
the first
spot?
assemblage was like 13 acres, and the site kind of looked like Texas. We had part of it,
Right,
actually, the way it looks today, you kind of goes up to where the on-ramp was,
right.
and then it went down to Cypress, and then over to Himes. Just part of that assemblage. You can see the buildings to the north and south. The substation was always there. That
And
was
the substation, is that
TECO.
owned by TECO?
Yes.
And so now that's the TECO. Is that the headquarters?
The headquarters is right adjacent to that. It's right where those kind of 4 or 5 buildings are, right to the south of it.
And
Directly to the
obviously,
south.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit,
Yeah.
but the deal structure on that, they own the dirt and you developed the building for them. And then
Yeah.
how did that all work?
Yeah, no, look, that was a really interesting deal. You're going right to the end, but we can talk about it. Yeah, there's the site kind of fully vacated, but yeah, no, look, the TECO,
Maybe the quick question it will lead to a longer answer. Sorry, but I've just been fascinated. Like that's a substation, right?
yeah,
And now, is that the site of the tower,
it's
or
the site right adjacent to it.
right adjacent?
Yeah,
to it?
look, when we bought the site, we had this naive, we're trying to buy all the land around there. So we actually approached TECO about saying, "Oh, could we relocate your substation? We really want that land." And we quickly realized like that substation serves like all of South Tampa, McDill, and stuff like that. So what TECO allowed us to do in the beginning in the late 90s is the transmission lines that reached that substation ran right through the middle of the site. So we moved the transmission lines to the north where the pond is now, so they go along the site. So that substation is an important
I see that. Yeah.
substation. But one of the interesting things about that substation, the site in general, and that we kind of lucked on, sometimes when you buy land, you just kind of don't know all the details about it. One of the great things about the Midtown site, and this does kind of lead to why TECO went there, is it's 27 feet above sea level. So it's really high, and it gets power from 2 different substations, including that adjacent one. So for a mission critical headquarters that needs to, avoid being in hurricanes, avoid flooding, have redundant power all the time, it's a really interesting site. And we ultimately found the perfect company who needs to be up and running 24/7 to locate there.
Wow. And that TECO headquarters is built directly south of that
Directly
substation,
south. Yeah.
which I think is the newest tower.
It's the newest Class A office building.
Yeah.
And I joke with the TECO people, we found the one company that can look at their own product from the windows of the office building.
They're
'Cause
right above it.
They're right above it. So they kind of stare at all their transmission lines and stuff.
Completed recently, correct? I mean,
Yes.
this is
Yeah. The CO, we just got the CO last week.
amazing.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we're really excited. Thank you.
And have they taken the entire building?
They've taken the building is 440,000 feet, 17 stories, and they've taken 300,000 feet.
Wow.
So TECO's got 300,000 feet. We have another 140,000 feet for non-TECO users. We've kind of created the building so it's almost like a building within a building. So TECO's got their own elevator bank. They have their own security, check-in and stuff like that. And then our other non-TECO users have their own elevator bank and check-in. So it's an interesting design.
Very cool. So back to, this is, I guess, early 2000s, when you kind of join in. You're in the office, you
Yeah.
see everything that's going on. You probably maybe kept up with the acquisition of this entire site, but eventually you realize, hey, there's a huge opportunity here.
Yes.
And so one of the first things, maybe not the first thing, but early on in 2009, you were having conversations with the Tampa Bay Rays to move them over
Yeah.
to Tampa and to build a stadium where Midtown is today.
Well, it's a little bit like, in 1991, my father got to Tampa when the real estate market's down. So, 2008 financial crisis, no one was really going to build any commercial projects. So we have all this land that we've had now for 10 years, and we've been working on different ideas. And a guy approached us named Dave Lefevre, and Dave was very involved with bringing the Tampa Bay Lightning to Tampa. So he's kind of a sports lawyer, and he'd done some really interesting things. And, we kind of known about the Rays trying to find a new home. And Dave approached us and like, you have a great site for the Rays. And it's a proven site for sports. It's a proven area for sports with Raymond James and Steinbrenner Field up the street. So he convinced us to kind of like play around with planning the site for a baseball stadium. And, you kind of baseball stadium, it's like, what? I didn't know how big a baseball stadium was. Could it
Right.
fit? How would it work? Right. So we hired an architect, and the rendering up on the screen here was our effort to put a baseball stadium on the site. And lo and behold, we came up with this design that we thought was really interesting to put the stadium, some retail. There was a hotel we designed in the side of the stadium, kind of like they have in Toronto. The stadium set up so it faced downtown, so it had this incredible downtown view when you're looking from home plate to the east. And yeah, and so we really spent 2 years kind of exploring this idea.
And when he first came to you, did he have the raise in his back pocket and said,
No,
"Hey, if you get..."
no, but I think he knew some executives at the
Sure.
Rays, right? And so yeah, so look, we did some homework. And then, we met with the Rays to kind of discuss the concept, like, would you be interested, right? And I think they were trying to figure out what the best place for them was. I mean, as they still are. And yeah, and look, we were excited about it. We thought about the park, from a parking standpoint. I think we designed 4,000 or 5,000 spots on this site, kind of hidden and underground and in the back.
It's really good looking. It's an ambitious stadium.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
The different components, the hotel built inside, really, the stadium.
Yeah.
And then you were mentioning having a sort of transportation center off Himes that would connect to the Ray J lots
Yes.
to bring people down for
Yes.
parking, retail component facing Dale Mabry. I mean,
Yes.
it's a beautiful project. I'm kind of sad it didn't go through, but Midtown's pretty sweet too.
Yeah, it was fun.
So
it was fun.
So you guys worked on this, you said, like a year and a half, 2
Yeah,
years
a
or
couple
so.
of years. Again, like there was not really a commercial. It was a kind of a fun project to consider. Like, look, there's no office being built. There's no
Right.
residential
This
being
is
built.
the height of the crash.
This is the height of the post-crash period. So we said, let's make a go of it. And so we spent some time, and we kind of met the Rays and discussed it. And there's obviously a lot of considerations the Rays had, and then ultimately we kind of realized that that stadium process is really caught up in politics and other things too. So we just, decided to pivot and go back to kind of more of a conventional real estate, development there.
Did it get close at all? I mean, did on your side, did you feel like, hey, this is gonna, work out?
Yeah, it again, I think part of that challenge was like the financial
Right.
needs of really getting, and was obviously caught up. And we always thought our stadium was kind of the middle ground. It was like Middle Earth. I mean, downtown Tampa had a kind of a dog in the hunt, and St. Pete so we're like, this is like Switzerland here, and obviously really easy to get to the stadium. And as I said, so yeah, no, I think we had some conversations. Ultimately, the amount of money it needed, and it was probably half of what a stadium costs today, with inflation. But even at the time, it was still $300 or $400 million of public financing, and I know the county was trying to come up with a solution for the Rays. So I think ultimately we decided it wasn't, because of factors outside of our control, we just had to kind of pivot back. And look, I mean, Tampa was really evolving. I mean, that's kind of the story of this site.
Yeah.
What was possible in 2008 from a development standpoint, or even 2010, became very different than what was possible, we thought, in ultimately 2017 when we really started this construction, right, as Tampa was emerging as a city.
So the Rays idea fizzles out 2010, 11-ish. Tampa, from what I remember, and really Florida as a whole, was kind of limping out of the recession.
Yes.
Some exciting stuff was happening, though. You get some cool new restaurants coming in. A lot of people were still moving to the area, not nearly the frenzy that 17, 18, 19. And then, of course, COVID was an explosion of all of that demand. But tell me kind of the in-between, right? So from 2011 to 17, is there more acquisitions of parcels?
Yes, there's more acquisitions. We had an interesting foray. We had I think it was Citigroup. They have a big campus in Brandon. And they were thinking about what to do with that campus. And they came to us about building a Citigroup kind of a corporate campus right here, right? And at the time, we owned maybe the 15 acres. But those two little pads on the north side and the south side off Himes, you could see the little buildings which are there. We didn't own any of those. And so we put Citigroup's headquarters on this site. And ultimately, they didn't decide to move. But one of the pieces of feedback the brokers gave us was that Citigroup would never move here unless you assembled the whole site. And we realized that, we really needed to buy the rest of the properties. So that 2011 to 17 period, we assembled probably another 10, 12 different lots on that site. And, it wasn't like we didn't start building anything. So I think the users there. So we worked out deals with another probably 10 users. And so we owned everything on Himes. And then there was the gas station on the corner and the Men's Warehouse on Dale Mabry were really the last two lots we purchased. But we ended up buying, ultimately we ended up buying 30 different parcels to assemble this site.
And how do you not hide but softly negotiate when these owners understand, hey, these guys are trying to buy the whole block here?
Yeah. Well,
there's certainly a strategy.
There is.
There.
Well, look, part of it is it was 20 years in the making. So like, you start it and then nothing happens, right? Because when you start buying, people know you're buying stuff. But ultimately, when you wait 10 years and do nothing, people kind of lose hope.
Right.
Right. And so that helped that it wasn't kind of one period. So we just, we ended up just buying things through time. And, certain times businesses were just going to sell themselves.
Sure.
Right. And some of the stuff you got to pay a little bit more for because you just want it. But yeah, each one has their own story. There's 30 different stories here.
What was the longest like family owned parcel in there? Did someone own stuff from way back in the day?
Oh yeah. Plenty of the parcels were
Wow.
kind of 20-year ownerships, 30-year ownerships.
Wow.
The corner parcel on Dale Mabry and Cypress there was a gas station. That was a Shell station. And it ultimately was owned by Circle K corporate. So that was the last parcel we bought and the most expensive one. We paid $10 million for that 1 acre. I think it was a record at Tampa for the time for 1 acre.
And that would have been 2000?
Yeah, that's 17 or 18.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that was the golden corner,
Right.
right? And that was the corner. Ultimately, the Whole Foods is on that corner now. And so luckily we bought land for 20 years. So that dollar cost averaging just went up a lot at the end. But that was we had a dream that we didn't need that corner, but we really needed that corner. And that's ultimately, I think, the last big parcel that we bought.
And when it was all said and done, just because of that time frame, did you feel like your cost basis was,
Yeah, it was viable. Look, we built the development. So that was the benefit that we'd been buying land in the 90s and 2000s. So the early parcels were really inexpensive looking back. But that was really allowed us to do it. And the office building, again, we bought the office building for $3.5 million, but ultimately that was just scraped for land.
And that office building originally, how many acres was that?
Probably 2 acres.
2 acres
Yeah.
for 3.5, and then the last parcel was 1 acre for 10.
10. Yeah.
And so
It was a tough pill, that one, but you had to buy it.
But like you said, the golden kind of
corner.
the golden corner.
Right.
And then the Men's Warehouse, you actually had moved across the street. I remember that was kind of the last piece maybe of the puzzle that got switched around to create.
It was.
Tell me how that deal worked out.
So we had the whole development really organized at that point. We had the master plan done. We were working on financing. We own the real estate. We bought the real estate from a local guy named Ted Couch, who's kind of a wonderful local businessman. He was one of the founders of Moffett. But the tenant had occupancy of the space, and they had 6 or 7 years left on the lease. And so we met with the tenant, and we said, we got this. We need to move you. We didn't kind of get into the reasons why we needed to move them, but we need to move you. And they said, we're not going to leave unless you can get us one of 2 corners, which is Kitty Corner across the street on the east side or the southwest side of Cypress and Dale Mabry. So we had to go buy one of those corners, and one of the corners was already being developed into a Dunkin' Donuts, which is there today, and that was kind of too far along. And then the other corner was a kind of an auto detailing place, Audio Itch. And ultimately, we just had to, we had to kind of take it through the nose and buy that property too.
And then, just so I know, right, at this like higher level, when you're dealing with these leases and Men's Warehouse, or you can even speak generally, but what other ways could they have been satisfied? Would you have had to like pay the rest of the balance of the lease or something? Or?
I don't think there's any way we could have satisfied them. And this is, we talked to them about a financial buyout. But, a retailer with a great store doesn't want to move.
Right.
They just don't want to move. And, we've had this a couple of times. It seems like we always have like the best performing store. We need to move. So with Men's Warehouse, it was a top performing store, obviously right before the on-ramp. And so they just weren't going to be satisfied unless we found them a solution. So we had to really find a solution. And at that point, as I said, the project was almost shovel ready. So we were scrambling at that point to find the solution. Ultimately, we did find a solution. And the deal was not only find us a new location, but we want a turnkey store that we can just move the racks across the street and start selling for. So that's what we did. We not only bought the land, we built them a men's warehouse box according to their latest prototype, and we moved them across the street.
And I remember that was like boom, boom. It
Yes,
was very, very
it
quick.
was very quickly.
So,
Yes. I actually ran into the contractor at a bar on Howard about 6 months ago, and he reminded me, he's like, oh yeah, you guys provided all those bonuses to get it done early. He's like, that's the best deal I ever worked on. But it was really the last thing we needed to get done before we could start, a $500 million development.
So one thing that's came up on the last few podcasts, and something I've been working through at a much smaller scale in my own investment business, is spending extra money that might not make sense on a spreadsheet or from a return basis. It almost sounds like when you have to get things done for a greater vision, some of that ROI and some of those factors you probably worked through on Wall Street aren't really the deciding factors.
Yes. No, I think you're right. It doesn't, there's no comp that could justify the men's warehouse. There's no comp that could justify what we had to do with them. But it was like the feeling of like we're on the verge of this really incredible development, a generational, once in a career type development. And we'll work out some stuff in the background about how to make money or how to get higher rents at Midtown ultimately. But if we can't get out of the gate, we're nowhere. And you can think about it, back in 2017, we'd held the land for 19 years. I mean, we had different temptations through the years. We had the baseball stadium. We had all kinds of things, people coming through the years. Whole Foods, for example, had probably approached us 3 or 4 times over the last 10, 12 years before this because they were in Walters Crossing, where the Target is. And they wanted a nice surface parked Whole Foods right there, right? And we knew the site had too much potential just to give it to, or Costco approached us about having a big Costco there. We knew the site had too much potential just to give it away to a surface parked retail. It would have been a lot easier.
And you could have done that too.
And we could have done it. And frankly, the land was cheap enough that we had initially assembled where it might have worked. But my father had the vision, and then I really appreciated this too, that sites like this, they're really generational. In our case, literally generational from him to me. But also from a Tampa perspective, like it's, no one's ever going to assemble 30 different sites in an urban location like this. So luckily we had financing set up that we had long-term patient capital, our kind of company's money. We had a great lender in Regions Bank who was kind of very, very patient with the assemblage here. And so we just waited, and then we finally kind of got this organized. And, in development, like once you're ready, and you have to then just go all out.
Yeah.
And so that's why 2018, we started building this thing, developing this thing. It was like, all right, we got this. We think we have a concept that's a great concept. We're going for it. We've waited 20 years. This is it.
Wow.
This is it.
And so what's the conversation with the city government at the time? I think that's back to Buckhorn, right? Was the mayor in 2017.
Yes.
I guess you've dealt with what, 3, 4 different mayors?
Yeah,
huh?
we have gone through. We went through your grandfather. We had Pam Iorio. Buckhorn initially was a city council person when we kind of did the initial zoning, right? So he'd known about the site forever. And
by the time it all comes together, he's the mayor.
And he's the mayor, I think, for the rezoning. So him and Bob McDonough, who worked for his kind of economic development. And so look, we had this vision about what we thought was possible on this site. And I went all over the country looking at other successful mixed-use developments, right? There's probably 20 of these projects. There's one in Atlanta called Avalon. There's one in DC called Mosaic. And there's one in Silicon Valley, Santana Row. Anyways, I really studied how these projects come together, the mix of uses, how they work. And, like back when we bought the site, residential in this area, you never could do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was, there's office buildings in West Shore, but there was no residential. The mall was West Shore Mall at the time, or International Plaza, I guess, was early 2000s.
Yep.
So I think as Tampa kind of changed as a city, we realized like this urban mixed use didn't really exist. Even downtown Tampa, it didn't have vibrant retail all the time. It just wasn't the same. So we realized like Tampa's evolving as a city. There's really a need for that. And some of our, interesting, like, Water Street at the time was
Right.
emerging and Armature Works was emerging, right? So other people had this kind of idea. I think the thing that made us, a lot of people, South Tampa always used to be what? South of Swan, south
Right.
of Kennedy, right? So this was a little bit of a no man's land in some ways. But we thought it had, because of its geographic centeredness and because of the transportation access, we're like this, we can define this in a way that we think it will help evolve an entire area. And that's kind of ultimately why we thought it was Midtown, this kind of district that connects candidly, all of Tampa Bay.
Sure.
Not just Tampa.
I mean,
all of Tampa
honestly,
Bay.
yeah. Yeah, I think people in the beginning were like, what? That's West Shore. Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, not really. West Shore's further to the west, right? Off West Shore Boulevard, Boy Scout, all that up there. Yeah, this is really its own. This episode is brought to you by the official remodeler of the TBD Podcast, Kohler House Remodeling Company. Built on the belief that every homeowner deserves a premium experience, Kohler House is redefining high-end home remodeling with their commitment to integrity, craftsmanship, and quality communication. Their work speaks for itself, from condos in the towers of Channelside to 100-year-old homes in South Tampa, creating spaces that are both stunning and functional. What sets Kohler House Remodeling Company apart is their dedication to not only transforming homes into beautiful spaces, but to elevating the standard of residential general contracting. From concept to completion, every detail is handled with care, ensuring a process that's as smooth as the results are impressive. To learn more, check out our partner's website at kohlerhouse.net, KOHLERHAUS.net. This episode is sponsored by Chansey Architecture and Interior Design. Rooted in the heart of Ybor City for over 35 years, Walt Chansey and his team are trailblazers in their field. Beyond their work across the United States and the Bahamas, Chansey has shaped some of the most iconic residential and commercial spaces that serve as gateways to Cigar City, including Casa Marti and Casa Gomez. What sets Chansey Design apart is their ability to preserve the soul and character of historic buildings while seamlessly integrating modern design and functionality. They blend tradition with innovation, creating spaces that honor the past while meeting today's needs. Check out their work at www.chanseydesign.com.
One of the interesting things when we had meetings with office tenants and brokers who were coming in from Tampa who'd never been here, they didn't get like kind of figuring out the different neighborhood, West Shore, downtown, right? If it was downtown Manhattan, it would be, you're looking for office in New York City. Midtown and downtown are 3 miles apart. Like that's what it is in New York. And in Tampa, West Shore and downtown are 3 miles apart. But the way people in Tampa would talk about it, it was like they're in different universes.
Yeah.
And so we saw this need to be able to articulate, this is all part of Tampa. This is just a district, right? And so the greater aspect, because to me, one of the strengths of Tampa we saw is that Tampa Bay is a 3 million person MSA. And if you're an office user wanting to, locate your headquarters here, you want to have access to talent all over the place. They could live in Brandon, they could live in Lutz, they could live in South Tampa, they could live in Pinellas, right? And that was really one of the main pitches, and it still remains today one of the central pitches of our development, which is that you can access shoppers, you can access talent, office talent from all over Tampa Bay, right? And that's ultimately why we called it Midtown, to help define it as a way of a central, development piece.
So when you're flying, were you flying all over the country, visiting these
Yes.
different mixed-use developments?
Yes.
And so what are you tracking, right? From probably the Wall Street background would tell you to be, again, like spreadsheet oriented, looking at the square footages, looking at the rents. But there's also a different feeling to it as you're walking down the streets, and the way these mixed use kind of new age developments make you feel like you're in Manhattan. You know what I mean? You feel like you're a part of the fabric of the streets. What were you noticing as you were traveling around the country? Like what really spoke to you?
The reason I think some of these developers have been extremely successful, it's the interplay between all four uses, the hotel, the residential, the retail, and the office, and how each use makes the other three uses more valuable. And so when you have this kind of 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 instead of 4, that's kind of what's really interesting. Like the hotel here supports the office users, supports guests for the residential. The hotel supports the retail because visitors come in town, they want restaurants to go to and stuff. So that was really interesting. The other part of this, I think, was as we looked at Tampa as it had developed since previously, there was no, if you go to like Boy Scout, for example, like there's office buildings next to retail, next to hotels, but nothing's walkable.
Right.
Nothing shares the same parking. So they could be next to each other, but you'll drive from the office building to retail across the street. And so the whole pedestrian friendly aspect of it was really important. Like, so it was integrated, urban, retail was at the base of every building, and there was a vertical use, whether it's office, hotel, whatever, but it made it really walkable was really important.
Yeah, the emphasis is not on the streets, right? I mean, the streets are beautiful, but the streets are beautiful because there's only one lane in each direction, typically on most of it, except I believe in that main entrance area.
Exactly.
But it's all about the pedestrian experience, the wide sidewalks, the crosswalks, that park in the middle.
The center green. Yeah. So we have, today we have about 3,200 parking spots at Midtown. The goal, though, from a user perspective, is to not feel there's parking, right? So we put all the parking to the north, above the Whole Foods, so you don't feel like you're in this massive parking letter, but it's very pedestrian. There's a road on the north side there where you can kind of see it on the lower part of the screen. And originally we designed that road for cars, and ultimately we decided let's keep that road closed so it becomes kind of a nice, safe place so people can just kind of walk on that road, or, walk on that street and stuff like that.
Is there a development around the country you were most inspired by?
There was one in Atlanta I referenced called Avalon. And
pull that up, David. Let me see this thing.
Avalon, yeah.
Avalon.
So Avalon was anchored with a Whole Foods. It was in suburban Atlanta, and it had retail as its core, more retail than we have. It probably has 400,000 feet of retail.
What does Midtown have?
Midtown's got about 190,000 square feet, so maybe twice as big. But it's got residential apartments above. It's got a hotel. It's got office. And as we again, as I referenced in terms of 1 + 1 = 3, what we found in these developments is that whatever the neighborhood office rents or retail rents, if you go to mixed use, there's a multiplier effect. And so whatever the comps were for residential rents, for example, in West Shore, and I can talk a little bit more about this, you always would get a premium for all the vertical uses based on kind of having an active retail. And that's why kind of today the office rents at Midtown, I think, are the highest in Tampa Bay. The residential rents were probably 50% more than anything else in that surrounding area. Again, the hotel is really busy and stuff. So, but yeah, so Avalon was really one of our guiding developments, and you kind of, you just take inspiration for the way they designed it, very pedestrian friendly.
So this is Avalon.
Yeah.
And so they've done the same thing where they've parked the cars kind of behind these buildings. The main thoroughfare is all
exactly
retail facing. Yeah. And then as you zoom out, David, you've got these main thoroughfares. I don't know the streets up there. Maybe this is 285.
Yeah, there's a center green there right in the middle there. If you go, zoom in there. Yeah, there's that center green. Yep, there you go.
See if you can put the man down on the street. So this was the one that really spoke to you the most, one that you thought, wow, this is...
Yeah. No, it's a really incredible development. And it's got like a little check-in area. So bigger development. They have a movie theater. There's a center green, which is really the activated center we kind of modeled off of Midtown Commons.
They've got the whole Piedmont kind of brick, greenery look, right? Obviously, you've chosen to do more of a Florida, more contemporary feel.
And I think design-wise, it was really important for us to not, even though we built it at one time, to not feel like it's got the same exact architectural style. So you'll see the office buildings, the residential. We give each retailer like their own canvas to kind of get their storefront. So it doesn't feel like a master plan community that's got the same architectural standards, right?
It truthfully feels like you're in its own independent city. Like when you're at the, what did you call it? The Center Green?
Yeah, Midtown Commons, we call it.
Midtown Commons, when you're there at True Food Kitchen or getting a ice cream cone at Ben and Jerry's, you kind of look around and you don't even really feel like you're in Tampa in a way, but you
Yeah,
feel like you're in a very urban environment, like you
very
could
urban.
be
Yeah.
downtown somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's the
And I know
point.
that was the goal, right?
Yeah, it
That's the
was.
whole point.
It was the goal, So yeah, the streets when you're there to make it feel like, just interesting. Yeah, you kind of look at the architectural styles there, the office
This is a
building at
few
the end.
years ago here. This
Yeah.
is 2023.
Okay. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the latest tower, the tallest tower, is just got its CO last week. So it's what, 100% complete, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as of last week. So we're still leasing the other tower. Yeah, we're really excited about that building. Again, that was really a great collaboration with TECO. And in some ways, look, as I said, each part of Midtown built on the other. So the first phase, we built the 2 hotels, the 180,000 feet of retail, 390 apartments, and about 210,000 feet of office. And so that allowed us, one of the trickiest development thing about the project, construction thing, was to create the place, we had to build everything at the same time. This wasn't like a phased development. A lot of people do all build the retail, there's a pad site to do this and that. And so we built the whole thing at the same time, which was really complicated. The conversations we had in the beginning when it was just a sand pit, as you showed before, like we were selling the dream.
Right.
And most people thought we were crazy. And, you kind of get a couple people that believe in you and we executed it. The conversation with TECO was like a little bit easier because they could come and see what Midtown was, right? So we had that, you could see their undeveloped pad. There's
Right
a
there. Yep.
grass pad there outlined in blue, and that was the site that we showed them. So anyway, so we had this opportunity with TECO to really discuss some of the benefits. I think were obvious, the infrastructure benefits, the talent benefits in terms of how they could locate there into a modern kind of office headquarters building. So anyways, they've been a terrific partner. And, in some ways for us, it was kind of a validation of the site that one of Tampa's biggest, most important companies chose to put their permanent headquarters at Midtown. It was kind of full circle.
100%. Yeah. And so getting all this done, right? You mentioned this was all done at one time. You said it was pretty complicated. You did a rezoning for PD.
Yep.
There were city streets in there.
Yeah.
I noticed that were privatized into this development, and then this whole new grid was created. Why go that route versus develop on the grid system that was already there for I don't know how long, probably a long time?
Yeah. Well, there's probably 2 or 3 reasons. One is, as we did the master plan just didn't align with what the city streets were, right? And so we realized to optimize the best real estate, we just couldn't work with the way Gray Street, which was the street in the middle, and interior streets, Arch Street, worked. The second reason was really from a post-development perspective. By redoing the streets, we had complete control of how the site would run. So, for example, I told you about the street we shut off. So, for example, when we want to do private events at Midtown, we want to do a big gathering, we have these sunset markets and stuff like that. We have the ability now, because they're private streets, to shut off all the streets. And so it gives us a lot more control from an operating perspective to be able to manage the streets. The downside of it, obviously, from a development standpoint, is we had to pay for developing, rebuilding all those streets, putting all the infrastructure, which is really expensive. We got no public money for Midtown. So, it's expensive. The infrastructure parts of Midtown are extremely expensive. Probably cost $30 million on the pure infrastructure side to get this site so it's kind of pad ready, so to speak.
You hear some of these larger developments in this region get a lot of public money. Was that a conversation that was had with our local government?
It was.
And it just politically didn't work out?
Yeah, it didn't work out. And, it's a challenge. It's a challenge because everyone sees these developments and there's just a lot that goes into making them, right? And I think we realized that, for example, the TECO building was one of the key. We had to believe, not just in the phase 1 that we developed, but we had to believe there was incremental value in, for example, that TECO building to make it financially feasible. So it goes back to your question, like at the time, the pro forma kind of doesn't work out. and you have to, the analytical side of you looks at the spreadsheet and you're like, this kind of doesn't work. The development and visionary side of you says, but it will, and we'll figure it out. And that's the attitude we had to take here. I mean, we were taking a huge risk in terms of what we were trying to put together. And, you have this vision, you have spreadsheets, you obviously have bankers and investors that you have to kind of satisfy. But you also just have to say, I'm going to step out off this plank and we're going to work it out.
Was that pendulum always swinging within the office? Meaning, were the executives and you and your father and all these people kind of going back and forth between that analytical versus visionary, or were you guys holding that vision and it was the bankers, it was the city, it was the kind of outside that was?
It's a little of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you still, you never, by nature, I'm always thinking about the next risk. I go to problems, not successes, right? And that's just the way I look as developers. You kind of do things and people compliment you, but I'm like, all right, we still got a list of 4 things. So I think, look, we believe that if we could create a great place, people would come. And we believe, for example, with that TECO Tower, which was a very important part of the business plan, that we didn't know TECO was going to take it, but we ultimately thought if we can create this great place, it'll be a very unique opportunity to add another office building, right? And for all the reasons I said before about just Tampa not having kind of great urban walkable office with amenities. So we had to, there it is.
Look at
There's
that
the
thing.
new TECO Tower.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Super prominent.
Strikingly tall, and prominent for that location.
It's so we spent about probably 18 months getting just the height of that building approved. And that was probably the biggest constraint to the development. We got it rezoned, that individual site. And then because we're close to the airport, we had to get the approval to do a 300-foot building. And the tallest building in that area was probably 200, a corporate center maybe. I think they're 230, 240 feet.
On Kennedy, right?
On Boy Scout.
On Boy Scout.
The smaller office building we have, the West Tower, was about 210 feet.
That didn't need approval for the height?
It did need approval, but it was within the kind of what was similarly approved, right? And so this building we needed to get 300 feet to do 440,000 feet. So that required a very detailed process with not only the local airport, but the FAA.
Did you have TECO inked when you went to?
We had TECO waiting to sign. And that one took a couple years off of my life because TECO was going to their final board meeting to get the final approval. And we were still waiting for this 300-foot approval. And literally, I think it was in 48 hours of when we got the approval, TECO was going for the final, green light from their board of directors. So we just got this in time. Really, we just got it in time. Yeah.
Damn. And so, when you're asking,
it's like PTSD, that one.
Yeah,
I still remember
sorry to
to
bring
this
it
day.
up.
Yeah.
But I mean, that must hold some weight, right? When did you use TECO as like ladies and gentlemen, TECO?
No, it did. It wasn't as much the local airport authority like Joe Lampana was. It was really the FAA. So when you're dealing with Washington, they don't care about TECO.
Right.
You're dealing with this massive bureaucracy, and it was Oklahoma City. They had people in Oklahoma City and Washington and Florida. So
they don't even know the site. Probably.
They don't really know the site. It's like kind of GPS coordinates for them, right? And so they're running. We got the U.S.'s foremost airport radar interference expert out of Oklahoma City to kind of put together a whole analysis of why this building wouldn't interfere with the safety of the radar for planes landing in downtown, in the airport. And, it's a very difficult process to go through, when you're kind of have a great tenant, something that should happen, and you're dealing with, the federal government who kind of holds your future in their hands. So
we're kind of, we're talking about risk assessment and bet making. Like that's kind of what real estate development is, right? And your philosophy was if you build it, they will come. Isn't this height limit approval also kind of a bet? I mean, you're paying these experts, you're paying attorneys, you're probably spending a lot of money to try to get this done without really a guarantee that you can get it done at all.
Yes. We were right on the edge. Look, these projects, you're not going to build these projects unless there's times in all these projects. We have 4 or 5 in this project where you're right on the edge, where the success or failure of your project is really in the balance, and you have to get something done. And you have to have the vision married with the belief and just the raw, we're not going to fail on this, right? And so TECO believed in us. We made a commitment to them. We were going to figure out how to get this done. That's what our job is as real estate developers. And, I personally got very involved with this process. I know more about radar vectoring than I ever thought I would know. And the local airport was great and supportive of it, but it was really the FAA's final call to decide, is this building going to interfere with radar and the landing of planes in Tampa? And so, as I said, we got the approval mere hours before this board meeting, and we had a nice celebration, and then we were on to the next challenge.
And so, David, go back to that overhead. These parking lots, do you own the bottom right parcel that you were talking about earlier?
Yes,
and so you guys control the entire thing, including the parking lot to the north, right on the lake.
And that parking lot to the north is now today is part of the TECO garage. So we built that out now.
Got it.
We've kind of accordioned that parking lot. So that big parking deck has 2,400 spaces. So I think it's one of the biggest parking lots in Tampa.
Yeah, I was excited to see, just as a Tampa resident, you guys did some creative, artistic designs on the parking garage. It's so many parking garages are so ugly and in your face. And even though developers try to do some ground floor retail, if you leave the concrete on the second, third, fourth floor, it takes so much away from the experience, at the pedestrian level.
We spent a lot of time thinking about parking. We still are, actually. In fact, 2 days ago, we just put up a lit Midtown sign on the edge of that parking lot. So you see it from 275 and Dale Mabry as we finish the expansion. But yeah, the ground floor, one of the interesting things about that parking garage is we built the ground floor up 18 feet. So it's a really airy experience in there at the ground floor level, and again, part of that was it's more expensive to do it. That part of that is from a user perspective. When you get to the ground, it just feels airier, it feels safer and stuff like that. And with the expansion now, we're doing a whole set of, striping and similar to airports, where they paint the columns so you don't get lost in the parking. You can take a picture of it. We're doing a whole set of
like Disney World
wayfinding, exactly like Disney.
Yeah.
A2 purple, right. A3 purple, right? So we're trying to make it so it's kind of easy to navigate and you can kind of get around there.
So these other parking lots to the south then, like the southeast corner, which is on Cypress and Himes, is that going to be a future development eventually? I mean, could be years down the road.
Yeah, so we have the potential to develop that, and we'll kind of figure out what we're going to do. We could do, frankly, anything there. We could do an office building. We could do a residential tower. I think for now, we're going to get this, we're getting the TECO building done, kind of just take a breath, get the site kind of going, get TECO moved in.
Take a breath after 30 years.
Figure out.
So it seems like there's a transition happening maybe since you guys in Water Street, like 2017, 15, something like that. Like when I was growing up in Florida, it was all about the parking lot in this styrofoam-esque fake facade thing. I don't know if you're familiar, like with the old Channelside development where Sparkman Wharf is now.
Of course,
Had you guys developed this 20 years ago, it probably would have been like that.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's been this recent shift? I mean, in the last decade, people really, really appreciate this type of development. It seems like all developers on this scale, even on small projects, are spending extra money for pedestrian experience versus how do I park as many cars as possible and how do I satisfy square footage for the tenant?
Look, I think some like structural things have changed. For example, Uber and car sharing, right? That didn't exist, 10 years ago. So I think there's certain things that have changed that kind of allow it, right? I know the city of Tampa for a while has been thinking about their minimum parking ratios, right? In terms of how to become more, progressive, right? I mean, there's certain municipalities in the country that have no minimum parking. There's no requirement for minimum parking. They allow the developers to decide. And the assumption is if the developer underparks, their development's going to be worthless because people can't get there, right? So I think, I think part of it is like our experience of trying to find a great place not in Tampa, because part of the challenge when you articulated this division somebody before was there's nothing we could kind of compare it to in the market. Like it's just like this, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons maybe why, Water Street and us are kind of out of town developers, so to speak, because we kind of used inspiration from other places. But I think, look, I think people are people no matter where they live. And I think people want just places where they feel kind of comfortable and inspired and easy, right? And so that's, I think, what we're trying to do, just try to create a place that just feels just easy for people and comfortable for people and invigorating for people, right? And
be connected to each other.
And be connected. And look, we, the center green, the Midtown Commons, when we were designing that, we worked with this firm, WDG and Gensler, two big architecture firms. What we had them do is take inspiration from other great public spaces, including like piazzas in Italy. So we benchmarked the size of Midtown Commons with other piazzas in like Florence, right? There's places that have been great gathering spaces for hundreds and thousands of years, right? There's not like that, again, this is my point, like people are people. They like to be with other people and connected with other people. So we tried to really think about like what are the proportions of this place? How big does it need to be to create kind of an energy? So again, our inspiration for this project was not only these other projects I told you, but they were really thinking about just what makes a great place, almost going back to like human needs, like Maslow's needs for kind of safety and security. And so anyway, so we really tried to think a lot about it.
I love the philosophy and the idea of implementing that kind of across the board, developments big and small. I think it's probably easier for larger, easy is probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean? For larger developments. You
just have a little more space to work with.
You have so much more control, right?
And you have more control.
But these smaller developers should have the chance to create places like this too, because I think there's a huge demand for it. Like in my little neighborhood in South Tampa, it's not built out at all like this, right? It almost feels very suburban, even though you're in a city. And yet on the weekend at my local little coffee shop, people are like crossing the street and the sidewalks are kind of broken, but people are still attempting to live that lifestyle. Yes. Did you see anything working with the city? I mean, it sounds like your experience was great. I can't speak for you, obviously, but it all got done. And
yeah, look, it's never, I'll give you an example. The West Shore overlay on Dale Mabry requires all retail to be on the street. And the impetus for that is to feel like you're not in these surface, like huge surface, like the Walmart, for example, north on Dale Mabry is way back from the street, right? And so when we were working with the city to master plan this thing, Whole Foods requirement was like, we need a little teaser parking in front of our store, right? So that you can see the parking lot in front of the Whole Foods. So most of the Whole Foods parking is above their store in a ramp. And so that was one of these things where it was like, the city code is to have the retail against the street. And Whole Foods is like, I'm not going to do the deal unless I have this teaser parking in front. And so we had to convince the city, I'm giving you one little vignette here, but we had to convince the city that the Whole Foods presence on Dale Mabry, when you drive it, is so big now. It's not like you feel like it's miles backwards. But we had to convince the city to give us this waiver to allow like this small surface parking lot. The parking lot there, I think, has 60 spots to be able to set back the Whole Foods, because otherwise Whole Foods wasn't going to do the deal. It was that black or white.
Whole Foods operates in other markets though, like in New York City they have. So why here in Florida do they feel like the people drive everywhere? It's a car-centric city, so they had that requirement on their own?
Yeah, I think they want, look, I mean, Whole Foods, look, people are going to get to the Whole Foods driving. I think psychologically, people need to feel like there's parking
spaces. Right.
They see it.
I can whip in real quick.
I can get in.
Yeah.
And if you, again, practically speaking, I think they need to train people because the lot, we built a lot above the store. Now, if you've ever gone up there, the second floor, there's a ramp. So, Tampa, it's raining, it's hot, and it's a really nice experience because you just park there.
It's so easy.
It's got a cartolator that goes down. So if you have a lot of groceries, you can do it.
Very similar to the Publix on Howard Avenue.
And the Publix on Howard, too. Yeah. So, again, it was the kind of thing where, as we were kind of, again, Whole Foods pointed us to a store in Charlotte that had this parking. Yeah,
It's
there
a
it is.
baby parking lot.
It's
I
a
mean,
very small lot,
yeah.
but it gives a psychological, I think, feel for people that there is surface parking.
But that was a pinch point for
that
them.
was a deal breaker for them.
Wow.
And it conflicted with the city code that the West Shore overlay has to have all retail on Dale Mabry. So that was kind of one of those things when we were working out the zoning with the city. We had to show them a design, and we thought, it feels very, it's a big time presence on Dale Mabry. So give us a variance to allow us to put the Whole Foods back. So that was kind of an example of something we had to go through.
And the sort of like leverage, I guess, Whole Foods has is like, hey, we already have a location,
Yeah,
half a mile, not
yeah.
even.
I mean, the kitty corner across the street. That was, it was a successful location in spite of it being in a really awkward place to get into because there was a parking lot in front of the Whole Foods, so you couldn't even see it. But this is the flagship Whole Foods of Tampa. It grew from the one across the street, I think, was about 32,000 feet. This one's now 50,000 feet, so it's almost 60% bigger. And it's it's obviously a really important part of our development.
So I wonder, there's a code in the city that the retail needs to be brought to the street level on Dale Mabry. That's interesting because just from my memory and thinking about Dale Mabry, that highway does not feel like walkable at all.
And I think part of it, they changed this West Shore overlay to try to avoid situations like, the Walmart where it's set back through,
Right.
2 acres of parking
Right.
or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. But again, we put the REI right on the street there. You can see that to the north, and that kind of gives them a presence.
Now that store, I don't ever remember growing up with that. Is that the only REI store
Yes.
in Tampa?
Yes. And so we had a number of experiences when we were developing this thing, when we were leasing it up, of really great national retailers that had been looking in Tampa for many, many years and just couldn't find the right location.
Right.
And REI was one of them. And REI was an example of somebody. They do a lot of business online, the REI co-op and stuff. So they knew that there were a lot of REI members in Tampa, and they needed a store here. I mean, they're really, sophisticated like that. So REI had been looking for, I think, like 10 years to find a store. There was, the old Comp USA a little bit further down. There's a Rivian dealership now. They had looked at that and stuff. So anyways, it was an example of somebody who really wanted to be in Tampa, couldn't find the right mix of image and real estate and proximity, all things they wanted. So it was kind of an opportunity for us.
The most highly trafficked corridor in
Yes,
the region, right?
right? Yeah, no, it was, again, very simple to them. It's like there's 70,000
Totally a
cars a
no-brainer.
day on Dale Mabry. There's 250,000 cars on 275. You can serve all of Tampa Bay, from the store.
I've heard that a lot. Tampa doesn't seem to have its commercial real estate fully expressed. It seems like that's a kind of a common problem where these retailers want a space, but there's really nowhere to go.
No, I think Tampa, maybe Phoenix are two of the most in-demand retail markets in the country right now.
Wow.
And, International Plaza is obviously a highly successful, regional mall. WS and Hyde Park Village has been really successful. They've done a great job kind of revitalizing that project down there. But yeah, I think people are realizing that Tampa's got a lot of great buying power and shopping power. And there's plenty of retailers now that are national grade, kind of online, offline retailers, and they know where their customers are buying stuff online, and they all kind of want, many of them want physical presences in the market.
Are you seeing these retailers choose to be in a space like Midtown where people are out, you're getting a Ben & Jerry's ice cream cone, you're out in the sunshine, you're walking past other people, versus drive to a parking garage and go to a mall? Do you think a lot of retailers are preferring this?
The outdoor lifestyle center, the more urban environment,
Yeah.
I think is, there's a lot of retailers who have a certain brand. They kind of, their image is a certain, whether it's an athleisure retailer, they kind of want kind of an urban manifestation of that brand from a retail presence because that's what their brand is about. So yeah, I think the outdoor lifestyle center experience, I would say this nationally, is something that's important to them, in terms of how they think about their brand and how they think about their store. And look, some of our retailers, another important element, a lot of retail now is the ability to kind of service customers from their store. So for example, Whole Foods has got, DoorDash and pickups or Uber Eats and stuff like that from Whole Foods. A lot of the restaurants now, That's an increasingly important part of the business. So having a central location from which to deliver stuff locally is really important for them. And again, that speaks to a little bit why Midtown's important, because you have an easy place for people to come to. Conversely, you also have an easy place to take product from the store and deliver it to, area residents or businesses.
The lake you did too. That's stormwater retention is the kind of overall purpose, right?
Yes.
But it's kind of an asset to the development.
Oh my God, there's a whole story on that one. There's a whole story on that one
I'm sure the
too.
people that work in the offices love to go for a little lunch break walk around it. It's kind of nice, really. I mean,
you had the images before. So that lake, before we started development, was the on-ramp, off-ramp at 275. And there was a whole circular set of roads there. And what happened as we were finishing the planning of the development was something that was interesting and fortuitous, that I-275 widening was starting. And the FDOT, there it is.
Oh my gosh.
So there's the lake.
Wow.
You can see the on-ramp, off-ramp. And you see the off-ramp, the on-ramp went right to the north side of our site where our kind of walking path is today. And as part of the project, they moved the on-ramp so it was right flush. So you kind of go up Dale Mabry and you take a right next to the road. And so what that did is they needed retention for the highway, and they were going to build a lake there. So when we heard they were doing that, we said, well, why don't we just contribute some of our land? We'll make it one lake, one bigger water area. And in return, like Bromley, we will manage that for you on behalf of FDOT. Seems like a really logical thing to do when I'm talking to you about it, but that also took us 2.5 years. We had to hire a lobbyist who was in the state of Florida's Transportation Hall of Fame, a former state senator, to kind of get it done. But there was a whole set of, they said, oh, this has never been done before. We did a Freedom of Information Act. We realized it had been done 13 different times. So we created this joint use pond that we now administer, and we created this whole walking path around it. So it's a great amenity for the site. Yeah, these are construction photos. You can see them.
And you're talking even before
we even started.
Wow.
Because if we didn't have that one pond, we were going to have to build our own separate pond on our site, which would have taken out land from our site. So it's like a total win-win in the fact that it gave us more developable land. It developed this nice water feature, so the office building looks out on water. It provided a little bit of a buffer from 275. So it's like a total win-win-win. So we kind of worked on this agreement. We finally got it done. And it's really a critical part of the master planning element of this site.
Wow. I'm just thinking of all the entities you've dealt with to make this thing happen. I mean, the federal government, the state government, local. What an undertaking. It's pretty incredible. How big was your team internally to accomplish this?
Well, we did. That's interesting too. We probably had 7 employees.
Wow.
Working on this.
Wow.
So
that's it.
That's it.
7 people.
We had 7 people. And look, part of the way we did this in 2 ways. We had a great group of kind of consultants, architects, land use people that we brought in, right? I mentioned the FAA example. We found the foremost radar person in Oklahoma City, and the pond, we found the state's Hall of Fame state senator, former state senator. So we were always, each problem we came up with, I think this is one of the reasons we were able to do this. We just came up with like, all right, how are we going to solve this problem with the best person? And none of us internally knew anything about, retention pond, joint use retention ponds or radar vectoring. But so what we did, our philosophy was, instead of trying to hire a huge internal team to figure it out, we had a small team that allowed us to make quick decisions, share stuff, and then we found great kind of third-party partners to be able to kind of pull this off.
Wow. It's incredible. Is your father still alive?
He's still alive and still very active in the business.
Wow.
Yeah. So in fact, he was, 3 weeks ago, he just was awarded NAIOP Hall of Fame member for Tampa.
Congrats to him.
I think
awesome.
I think he was the only Tampa person who lives in Tampa who's ever been inducted for the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he had this vision of what's possible here. I don't think his vision necessarily was Midtown, but
Sure.
The vision was there could be a really interesting real estate development here. and we collaborated on kind of realizing that vision. And so, yeah, this project is, there's always something going on here.
Yeah.
And but we love Tampa. We believe in Tampa. As a firm, our southeastern headquarters is at Midtown, and we're excited about doing more projects here.
What's next for you in Tampa?
So yes, we'll take a breath on this from this
We'll
building.
be talking about Midtown for only an hour straight, but
no, look, I think we're looking at multiple different things in this city. So we're working on another. I'm going to be very general here, but we're working on another urban mixed use project, the kind of pre-planning of another urban mixed use project here that'll be over 1 million square feet that we're really excited about. Hopefully it's not going to take us 20 years. But I think, look, there's a lot of lessons learned on something like this as you kind of go through it. So I think we're much more sophisticated as developers. Obviously, we deeply enmeshed in kind of what we need to do to solve, city issues and planning issues and FAA issues and stuff like that. So anyway, so we're working on I say master planning of a really interesting, I think, equally transformative mixed-use project that we're excited about and hopefully get out there maybe at the end of this year in terms of kind of announcing. But we think it could be a really interesting project that shares some I'll call it transformational elements like Midtown did.
Is it also south of 275?
This is the problem when you start mentioning something like this. I'm going to keep it general at this point. So yeah, so we do development stuff. We're actually looking at kind of acquiring some industrial properties in the areas, like completely separate, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a kind of development part of our business, and we have kind of an existing asset, kind of a cash flowing. So it's almost the opposite of like complex mixed use development. We're looking to kind of purchase, 30 to 120,000 foot kind of Class B warehouses, with the interest being that these smaller warehouse properties, urban infill warehouse properties, there's always going to be a demand for them. And as there are more and more developments like this, as more and more industrial properties get eaten up by non-industrial uses, the plumbers, the electricians, the distributors are still going to need locations in kind of the Tampa core, maybe not this dense an area, but the Tampa core. So we have an investment strategy which we're focusing on to kind of acquire properties. We have some property in Atlanta and South Carolina, so we're looking to really focus on Tampa Bay and Orlando to kind of acquire some of those properties.
I mean, the I-4 corridor, when it comes to logistics, it's like the logistical capital of the entire state.
And that bet is really based on Tampa Bay, Florida growing, right?
Yeah.
And so we believe in this market. This market is going to continue to grow. We think it's going to be a continued net, in migration from other states, organic migration. We believe in more businesses coming here. So effectively, both the development side of the business, that industrial side of the business, the confidence to pursue them is really coming from the same place, which is Tampa's got a ton of, potential growth. And obviously now Tampa's dealing with how to manage all that growth, right? I mean, there's so many people that have moved here the last few years, and how do roads keep up? How does the government keep up? All the services that make Tampa, a livable place, and that those transitions happen in every cities right now, right? But we believe this market's got plenty of room to grow, and is really now. Obviously, people that grew up here know how special it is, and certainly people that are coming here are realizing how incredible a place it is to live and raise families and stuff.
Yeah, I have an unshakable faith in this market. I think we have so much going for us. I mean, too many things to list, but you have a pretty macro perspective. I mean, you live in New York, you have assets here in Tampa. Obviously, we've talked about. What other holdings do you have? What other states?
We have stuff in, I think I mentioned the student housing. We're starting another student housing project at the University of Illinois. Again, like the universities in Tampa is another thing, like USF and University of Tampa, like these incredible schools that are growing at such high rates.
The kids are staying here too,
and the kids are staying. And look, that's really part of the story. Like 10 years ago when we first thought about 20 years ago. The story of growing up here, going to Washington, going to New York, not coming back, right, for young talent. And now you get people with the opportunities here, the real estate here, that they're being educated either in Tampa or other places, and they're coming back, right? And that's really exciting, I think, from the market's perspective, to have, you know, people, just young people wanting to be here and grow here
Yeah.
and raise families here. So, yeah, look, Tampa Bay, I think generally is our focus market for growth,
Yeah.
certainly from a development standpoint.
There's so many metrics that are positive. Is there anything you think the region is missing or the region should focus on, whether it's like large industry headquarters moving here?
Yeah, I think it's just like, how does the city, as I mentioned, like how does transportation's been out there for many years.
Right.
Like, what's the transportation solution, and how does, it's like no one wants Tampa to be a victim of its own success and to just be overwhelmed, right? And I think, Tampa has to evolve as a city. I think it has to evolve as a city. I mean, the city council now obviously gets involved with a lot of issues. And I think for Tampa to develop, there's just a set of issues probably that the city council probably shouldn't opine on every meeting, right? It doesn't, as cities get so big, right? So I know there's a lot of discussions about how to have government continue to support the growth of the city in the most efficient ways. I mean, when we filed the permits for this, 6-7 years ago, the building department could, there's much less activity in the building department as there is today, as you know, or all developers know, right? And how does the building department keep up with all the growth, right? And so, I think Tampa just has to, keep being able to support
growing pains. Right. It's like any growing region has to answer all those same questions.
Yeah. But there's nothing kind of fundamental, that's kind of a constraint, right?
Well, God, we have a lot of potential. I mean, we have incredible weather. We're in Florida, which is very favorable for business.
Yes.
I think people have always moved here to retire. We'll continue to have that demographic. I think one thing that's changed is what we talked about with these kids. I mean, the young talent, the young educated talent, the fact that they want to stay here is to me a huge indicator. That's a shift to me.
Yeah,
that didn't exist 10 years ago. All those kids would go back to the Northeast. Some of them work for me. They love it here and they want to be here. I think their challenge is some of the affordability, right? There's not a whole lot of high-paying jobs that can support living here. Some of them have moved to Charleston and Savannah. Kind of sucks to lose that young talent, but it is what it is. So I think that's a huge challenge. Transportation we need to focus on. I think we need some sort of a fixed line from Midtown to downtown and then over west to the airport. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think those are issues we've been involved with historically. I know. And we want to continue to be in. We're not giving up. We're not giving up on the transportation thing.
I think it'll happen. It all just takes time.
Yes, I mean the sales tax issue was kind of a setback, right? But we're getting there. I think we're getting closer.
The people are paying attention to what matters. I think losing that was a big thing for this community. I think the next opportunity we have to do something like that, much more people will rally behind it and pay attention.
And I think there's as generations of leadership evolve and stuff like that, I think people realize that this is going to be fundamental to Tampa's ongoing success, right? And important for our developments, but important for everyone, important for neighborhoods. So, we really we just couldn't be more kind of bullish on kind of how Tampa's developing and kind of what the future is.
Now, did you guys develop the site on the northeast side where those townhomes are too, or was that a different group?
No, another group. So again, that was part of a
kind of an interesting play.
an interesting little development. And we got approached about buying that site, and for us it was almost kind of too small, but like we appreciate development in this area, right? Because those townhomes, obviously they market Midtown. Being across from Midtown is an important part as an amenity.
Well, and so all the brokers with all these homes say that too, quick 2-minute walk to Midtown.
Yeah.
Which makes me, that's kind of leading into my question about this whole neighborhood here and how a very intensive development that is mixed use, kind of fits into this neighborhood to the east.
Yeah.
To me, developers could come in here and continue to kind of over the course of decades, obviously not overnight, but expand this thing, not necessarily with the intensity of use, but I could just see this infrastructure wise connecting into Midtown. And maybe this becomes a deeply walkable neighborhood. Because I wouldn't say the connectivity of these neighborhoods to the southeast and the east and the south have fully expressed themselves, right? Midtown primarily is a to development.
Yes.
It would be really great to see these neighborhoods have a better way to connect into Midtown. I think that'll just take time.
Yeah, no, well, look, we get people walking from the neighborhoods to the east to
Sure.
our events and stuff like that. Obviously, I think we've had an important positive effect on the real estate value of some of those homes and stuff like
It's
that.
a sales pitch they use, I can tell you that.
Yeah, there's little redevelopments that have happened in there, pockets of them in terms of like little townhomes, single family home sites that have now become like little townhome sites and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that area is kind of West Tampa, or I guess West Tampa, generally defined, Midtown Tampa. They kind of intersect, right? And I think I remember at the zoning meeting when we got Midtown rezoned. You go to those meetings, you're like, okay, you got to brace yourself for who's going to complain about things and stuff. And we had I think we had 4 people come up to speak. I mean, which is pretty incredible for a 2 million square foot development. You're kind of getting ready for people to complain about different things. And one woman who lived with her family in that neighborhood, she came up and you're not bracing yourself for what she's going to say. And she just said, she felt like she's like, I'm so glad this area is going to get more of an identity, because I think it's a little bit to the west of what popularly conceived as West Tampa.
It is. Yeah.
And so she just said, she's like, and I would like city council to formally promote the entire area as Midtown officially, right? And so officially or unofficially, it was nice for her to say that. And I think kind of having the Midtown as a resource for all those people to kind of walk across Himes. I mean, we do have a signalized intersection right at Himes in the middle of development, so people can cross the street as we do on Cypress Street too. But yeah, look, Cypress is a really important spine for us too, and it's kind of our secret sauce. Like if you want to go downtown from Midtown,
oh yeah,
it's faster to go down Cypress 100%. Than it is, 275.
Yeah,
and same way to the airport too.
And again, I think the city knows that, and the public knows that, and they're going to have to redo that road all the way to downtown. Yes. I think that's even you do some sort of a transportation corridor down there. There's a lot to connect. I mean, David, if you just do one zoom out, everything north of 275, all those big box commercial deals, McFarland Park, West Tampa's right there. I mean, I think the challenge in the city of Tampa and kind of the region is going to be connecting all these opportunities together. Yeah, all these nodes.
Well, Cypress kind of dead ends, I think, into the FDOT, where the old Charlie Steakhouse was, right? And that was going to be a big multimodal center. And so part of it, they haven't done that yet, but I think part of the thought was, that becomes to the west.
Right.
That becomes kind of a connector piece to the airport, the multimodal
I think it's right
center.
Where you've grabbed, David, kind of right there north of 275.
Yeah.
Isn't
right
that
there.
It? Right there. Now, I'm not even aware of what that means. I mean, multimodal, I guess they had planned on doing some sort of a bus train.
Yes.
Who knows where they're at in that process. This community's held its breath for a long time in regards to transportation, but we'll get there eventually. Look, I mean, you kind of what do? Do you put the cart before the horse, and do you spend billions of dollars on all this infrastructure before it's necessary?
Yeah.
Or do you need the midtowns of the region to come and establish themselves and have people come use it, and then everyone gets together and says, okay, now there's the public will.
Well, I think it helps to have these nodes.
100%.
The Water Street, the Midtowns, obviously the airport is a really important stakeholder and node here. So yeah, there's always a chicken and an egg, and then you just need really need a powerful partnership of politicians and the private sector to help catalyze something. And we've gotten close a couple times, and I think everyone just needs to remain committed to it, and something will ultimately happen.
Patience is a hard word to say when it's been such a long time, but I really do think it'll all happen eventually. It's part of what I'm trying to do with this show is just have these conversations out in the open. Typically, big developers wouldn't come and sit down with a podcaster and talk through this. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. We love Tampa, and we're here for the long term. So we appreciate it.
Cool. Well, Nick Haines, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Garrett.
All right. That's it, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.